I am so beyond heartbroken with this game. I've never left a Steam review before, but I had to for this one. I waited 5 years for this, only to be kicked in the face repeatedly. The story is bad, the environments mean nothing, characters glitch out, the ending answers a question nobody was asking. Supermassive games living up to a supermassive flop. Short, lazy, soulless, reused assets. Through all this, one thing became painfully clear. Fans hated Little Nightmares 3. For the first time, a Little Nightmares game launched to mixed reviews, more negative than positive. So, what went wrong? Was Little Nightmares 3 destined to fail, and could this possibly be the end of Little Nightmares forever? To understand the disappointment, you first have to understand what made Little Nightmares special in the first place. The original wasn't just a horror game, it was a haunting fairy tale told through silence and atmosphere, where every small detail held meaning. It made players feel powerless, yet deeply curious, a perfect blend of fear and wonder. Little Nightmares 2 expanded that world, adding mystery, emotion, and themes of control and corruption that elevated the series to a near masterpiece in many fans' eyes. So, when Little Nightmares 3 was announced, the hype was enormous. New characters, co-op gameplay, and a promise to explore beyond the Maw and the Pale City, fans were ready for something unforgettable. But from the first reveal, something felt off. The tone was different. The charm and dread were replaced by something more ordinary. For many, it just didn't feel like a nightmare anymore. There was already initial disappointment when the studio announced that Little Nightmares 3 wouldn't be following 6, a fan favorite, at all, and instead, 2 completely new protagonists. However, many fans were still willing to overlook it if it lived up to its predecessors, which, for many, it did not. There was a reason for that, however. Little Nightmares 3 wasn't developed by Tracer Studios, the team behind the first 2 games. It was made by Supermassive Games, the studio known for Until Dawn and The Quarry. Cinematic, choice-driven horror experiences that rely on dialogue and branching stories, and constant chatter. 2 very different styles of fear collided, and it showed. The quiet mystery that once defined Little Nightmares was replaced with scripted cutscenes and on-the-nose writing. The eerie silence that told its own story was gone. Instead of a nightmare you experienced, it became more of a movie you watched. And then came the technical problems. Bugs, crashes, broken AI, and checkpoints that forced players to restart entire sections. For a game that fans waited half a decade for, it all felt rushed and unfinished. Reviews called it short, repetitive, and directionless, a collage of recycled ideas rather than something new. The story didn't build on the first 2 games or expand their themes. It didn't answer the mysteries fans had been waiting years to uncover. It simply existed. What was the point of the entire game? One reviewer asked, asking a question that summed up how players felt, not just disappointment, but betrayed. For a series built on silence, tension, and meaning, Little Nightmares 3 left behind only noise. Here was the problem. Nobody cared. The audience for Little Nightmares didn't care about Alone or Low, the new protagonists. They weren't attached to them, and they had no emotional investment. Fans cared about 6, a character they had already followed for 3 prior games. Those stories built connection through experience, not dialogue. They made you feel for the characters, not because the game told you to, but because you suffered with them. You saw them struggle, survive, and sometimes fail. That's what made the journey powerful. But Little Nightmares 3 didn't earn that connection. It asked players to care instantly about characters who, to most of the fanbase, meant nothing. The 4-hour runtime didn't help either. For most players, the game was over almost as soon as it began, and yet, it cost even more, $10 higher than previous entries, and $20 more for the deluxe edition. Fans felt cheated, calling it a blatant cash grab, and reviews poured in. I paid $65 for a game that took me and my buddy 4 hours to complete and a few more hours finding dolls. This game is far from worth $65, let alone $40 normally. Another said, the game was absolute trash, definitely not worth €40. And they were right. For a game that was the same length as the previous ones, and arguably worse, the price bump made no sense. Combine that with the bugs, lag, crashes, and broken checkpoints, and Little Nightmares 3 started to feel less like a long-awaited sequel and more like an unfinished experiment. But the most disappointing part wasn't the price or the performance. It was the story. The heart of the Little Nightmares series has always been its quiet tragedy, the way it leaves you thinking long after the credits roll. But Little Nightmares 3 failed to do that. The story felt disjointed, like pieces thrown together without rhythm or reason. There was no emotional payoff, no haunting moment that stuck in your mind. Compare that to Little Nightmares 2, a game that people still talk about 5 years later. The world was haunting, the monsters unforgettable, and the characters mattered. When 6 let Mono fall, it shocked the entire gaming community, one of the most iconic betrayals in gaming history. That moment stayed with players because it meant something. It changed how we saw the story, the world, even 6 herself. Little Nightmares 3, on the other hand, failed to capture that same spark. It didn't surprise, it didn't challenge, and it didn't linger. It just ended, leaving fans wondering not what it meant, but why it even existed at all. Supermassive Games approached the world of Little Nightmares like a movie instead of a dream. What once felt like a surreal, nightmarish fairy tale became just another co-op adventure game with spooky lighting. The art, the sense of stillness that made you stop and think about what you were seeing, had been replaced by noise. And that's the problem. Little Nightmares was never about action or survival. It was about feeling small in a world that didn't notice you. It was about the weight of silence, the horror of innocence swallowed by cruelty. Each moment of stillness in the earlier games had a purpose to make you uncomfortable, to make you listen, to make you wonder what kind of world could exist without hope. Little Nightmares 3 never understood that. It wanted to entertain, not haunt. It wanted to be a story-driven game with set pieces, not a silent descent into despair. And in that attempt to modernize it, it lost the one thing fans loved most, the emotions they felt. Even the monsters, once metaphors for human flaws and fears, felt hollow this time. In the first 2 games, every creature meant something. The janitor represented exploitation, the teacher was control, the thin man was loneliness and obsession. They weren't just enemies, they were nightmares given meaning. But in Little Nightmares 3, the designs felt safe, predictable. They existed only to fill the world, not to define it. The series' visual storytelling, its greatest strength, became its greatest weakness. The environments were larger, but emptier. The monsters were scarier, but shallower. The game looked like Little Nightmares, but to many, it didn't feel like it. And that emotional disconnect, that loss of atmosphere, meaning, and purpose, is what ultimately broke the spell. Fans didn't just want another horror game, they wanted a story that spoke without words, one that left them questioning what it all meant. They wanted Little Nightmares, but what they got was something else entirely, a game that looked like a nightmare, but felt like a dream someone else had. Critics described the game as soulless, forgettable, and a step backward from the series. Some defended it, saying it wasn't terrible, just empty, and that word seemed to echo everywhere. Empty. That's how players described the story. the characters, and even the world itself. It looked right, it sounded right, but it felt hollow inside, and that was the real tragedy, because for years, Little Nightmares had been a story about meaning in a meaningless world, but now, the game itself had lost its own. As days passed, the discussion shifted from frustration to grief. Fans began wondering if this was it, if this was the end of Little Nightmares. Treasure Studios, the original creators, had already moved on to other projects, and while Supermassive tried to carry the torch, it felt like a flame that had already gone out long ago. Without Treasure, the magic wasn't just missing, it was unreachable. The tone, the atmosphere, the emotional depth, those things weren't something you could replicate with better graphics or a co-op mechanic. They came from understanding the soul of what Little Nightmares really was, and maybe no one but Treasure ever truly did. And maybe that's what makes this all so sad, because Little Nightmares 3 could have been something beautiful, a new chapter in a beloved, twisted fairy tale. It could have deepened the lore, explored new fears, and shown us the next evolution of this haunting universe. Instead, it became a reminder that not every story needs to be continued. Some nightmares are better left unfinished. As someone who's actually played Little Nightmares 3, I want to be fair, because despite everything, there are still things that this game does well. I genuinely enjoyed most of the monster designs, and I think Chapter 2 with the Supervisor is where the game truly shines. The atmosphere there captured the classic Little Nightmares dread, creative and beautifully unsettling. I did run into several bugs, but most weren't completely game-breaking. Only one was bad enough that I had to re-download the game entirely, causing me to miss a cutscene. Visually, the graphics and sound design are great. The world looks eerie and detailed, and I could see the potential for something really special here. And honestly, I did have a good time playing it. For all of its problems, it's still Little Nightmares. And that world, that strange, worldless unease, still has its charm. That said, however, my biggest complaint echoes what many others have already said. The price just isn't worth it. It is hard to justify spending $40 on a 4-hour experience when $60 gets you a game 4 times the size. Beyond that, the mechanics were one of the greatest disappointments. Fans were excited for the new tools, the bow and wrench, but in the end, they actually barely mattered. The flying umbrella mechanic had potential, but it was only used a few times before being forgotten. The puzzles too felt simpler and more linear, with less of the clever, eerie logic. Some monsters, like the baby or the kin, had fantastic designs, but they weren't used to their full potential. They felt random, more like short cameos than actual threats. As for the ending, I'm not going to hate on it like so many others have, because honestly, following Little Nightmares 2 was always going to be impossible. That ending where Six drops mono was lightning in a bottle. You can't recreate that kind of moment. Still, I do think Little Nightmares 3's ending could have worked if it had been executed better. The problem wasn't the concept, it was just that players didn't care enough about Alone for it to actually matter. There was so much untapped potential, especially with Lo's dreams and that mysterious creature watching him from outside his cell. I genuinely thought that was setting up for a major twist or a boss fight, but it never actually went anywhere. It's like the game kept introducing interesting ideas, only to drop them halfway through. The Little Nightmares Ending 1 and Little Nightmares Ending 2 had fans genuinely thinking and confused and seeking answers for the lore. But Little Nightmares 3 almost explained it too blatantly. The lore was explained within 20 minutes, and that's me going off script because we had theories for years coming out about Little Nightmares 1 and Little Nightmares 2 and what the ending could have possibly meant. But Little Nightmares 3, it feels like they just told us, hey, this is the ending, we all figured it out, there's not really more discussion to be had on it. My personal opinion. So, getting back into it, is Little Nightmares 3 better than Little Nightmares 2? Well, no, not even close. But did I still enjoy it? Honestly, yes. I liked Little Nightmares 3, and I had fun. I wish they had worked out the bugs more, as I missed many emotional cutscenes, as for some reason whenever I approached a mirror the characters would just become invisible, and the camera would spin and hardlock the game. But Little Nightmares 3 still has its moments, and you can see glimpses of the magic that made the series so special. I just wish it had more time, more polish, more care, and a fairer price tag. Because beneath all of its flaws, you can still feel the heart of what Little Nightmares used to be, a shadow of something beautiful, flickering just beneath the surface. In the end, maybe Little Nightmares 3 isn't a bad game, just a misunderstood one, a story that tried to move forward without realizing what it left behind. It wanted to grow, to expand, to try something new, but in doing so, it lost its quiet soul. For many fans, that was the hardest thing to accept, because Little Nightmares was never just about fear. It was about meaning, about the pain of innocence, the silence of being small in a cruel world, and the beauty hidden in the darkness. It was about finding something human in the monsters and something monstrous in ourselves. And Little Nightmares 3, for all its ambition, forgot to whisper those truths. It spoke loudly, but said very little. Yet even after the bugs, the price, the lost tone, I can't say I regret playing it, because somewhere inside the broken dream, there are still pieces of what made the world so special. The atmosphere, the creature design, the lingering unease that crawls under your skin, the potential is still there, buried beneath the noise. And maybe that's what hurts the most, knowing how close it was to being something beautiful again. Maybe that's what fans truly meant by heartbroken. So is this the end of Little Nightmares Forever? Maybe, or maybe it's just another chapter in a series built on tragedy where things fall apart before they can be made whole again. Whether the franchise sleeps or wakes again, the truth is the same. Little Nightmares left an impact few horror games ever could. It didn't need to speak or jump scares to frighten. It haunted us through its silence, and that silence still echoes. For now, the future of the series is uncertain. There are no confirmed plans for a sequel, no sign of Tracer returning, and no word from Bandai Namco about what comes next. Maybe Little Nightmares 3 was the end, or maybe it was just a bad dream, one the series can still wake up from. But if this truly is where it ends, then Little Nightmares deserves to rest in the silence it once mastered so perfectly.